Great to be here at Collision in freezing cold New Orleans. Great to see you all here. I want to talk today about some of the lessons that I've learned along the way about having conviction. Because I think at today's day and age, right, if you go to conferences about startups and about technology and about how to build a business, you learn about all sorts of tools about being lean and iterating and running A/B tests to figure out what your users want. But I think if you solely rely on those tools and that testing, it won't necessarily lead you to the right place. A/B testing is great, but if executed to perfection, will turn every website into a porn site. And I don't think that's, as entrepreneurs, what you set out to do. No, I've learned the hard way after starting 4 companies that actually having conviction for the product you're building and the customer you're serving is one of the most important tools in your tool belt as an entrepreneur. So my entrepreneurial career started in the mid-90s when I was an undergraduate at the University of Michigan. The web was a brand new thing, shiny and new, and I was just starting to learn computer science. And I really wanted an excuse to build things for this cool new thing called the web. And I noticed that around campus there were all these little stores, like copy shops, where students could go in and buy the lecture notes for the courses that they were in, Xeroxed on blue paper, so they couldn't copy them, for like $40 a semester. And that this was like a business, and like many people use these lecture notes. And I thought, wouldn't it be neat if instead of having to walk through the snow, as was the case in Michigan, to a copy shop to pick up the notes after every lecture, you just got them online. And this was my first entrepreneurial venture. It was called notes4free.com. 1996, we could have had any domain name we wanted, like Google, but we picked Notes for Free. Later rebranded to Versity, slightly better. And that was my first company. And I remember we started off at the University of Michigan, then we expanded to the Big Ten, and then we took it nationwide, and we raised some venture capital along the way. And when we raised a big round, it was like $10 million for a bunch of 21-year-olds, so that was a big deal. We raised a big round, and the investors said, you're going to bring in some managers to help you run the business. And we were like, sure, why not? So we brought in a bunch of C-level folks, a CEO, a CFO, a CMO, Chief Marketing Officer. And I remember this really funny thing happened. We hired this chief marketing officer, and the first thing he started doing when he joined was running focus groups with college students to figure out what they wanted. And the founders and all the early employees of the company, we'd hired all our friends, we're right there saying, hey, like here we are, like we're the audience. We're building this for ourselves, like we don't need a focus group. You're just going to spend all this money and time to find out what we already know and have been doing for the past 2 years. And he did these focus groups, and sure enough, he found out the things that we already knew. And I always thought that was so bizarre that he would walk into this role and have to rely on a focus group in order to figure out what the hell he was doing. So, predictably, we had all these C-level executives, and it didn't go great after that. We ended up selling to one of our competitors, and then the dot-com crash happened, and you can use your imagination. All the things that happened in dot-com crashes happened to us. And immediately after that, a friend of mine had the idea for StubHub, online ticketing exchange. Allow people to buy and sell event tickets with the idea that eBay wasn't good enough. There was a better way to do it specifically for live event tickets. And he came to me and said, hey, I've got this idea, but I want to get it off the ground. You're a technology person. Can you help me do it? And I said, okay, let's do it. So I was the first CTO of StubHub.com. And we built this. It was a mad rush. We worked furiously, late nights, 20-hour days. We went from the first line of code written to launch in about 6 weeks. It was a furious dash to get that company up online. And we were working late nights and building, doing the things you got to do as an entrepreneur to get it off the ground. But after a while, I realized something. I didn't have the same enthusiasm for the work I was doing. I was working really hard, don't get me wrong. But it wasn't coming from the same place. And after a while, I started to think in my head, God, aren't we just doing e-commerce of something else? Because I didn't go to a lot of concerts, and I didn't go to a lot of sporting events. I just thought I was writing code for something else online. I didn't have conviction the world needed the product we were building. And once I realized that, it got really 20-hour days. Very hard. And that's when I decided it was time for me to step away. Right around that time, one of my previous investors came to me, said, "Hey, Jeff, what are you doing?" I said, "This StubHub thing. By the way, don't invest in it," I told him. That was my advice. Bad advice. To my home, and we'll brainstorm, we'll research, we'll come up with ideas for a new company to start. I said, "Wow, that sounds really cool." We went out to his summer home in the Hamptons in the middle of the winter. It's desolate. We used to order things on Amazon just so someone would come visit us in a UPS truck. Focus. Storm. We came up with 1,000. Thank you. We came up with 1,000 ideas for possible companies we could start. We whittled it down to 100 that we thought were decent. We wrote the business plans for about 20 of them. But after all of that, we ended up starting a company as a physical bricks and mortar retailer for extreme sporting goods. Skateboarding, snowboarding, surfing, BMX biking. Because we realized that this market for extreme sporting goods, X Games sports, was like a $30 billion business, and it was growing at like 30% every year. It was crazy. And we looked at the retail market, and there were mom and pops, and there was Walmart, and there was nothing in the middle, like an REI type store. Experiential retail for those sports. And we said, let's start that company. Now, I don't know if you can tell, but I'm not exactly your model surfer. I don't have the agile physique of a skateboarder. I struggle to stand on 2 feet on this stage right now. But I decided to do this anyway. I thought it would be sort of interesting. What technology would you bring to bear to build a retail business from scratch in the 2000s? But a funny thing happened. We moved out from New York. We moved to California, to Los Angeles. We started our first store and then our second store. And I was writing code in the back room of the store. And a crazy thing happened. I came to not just dislike this business, I came to hate our customers. I hated our products. I hated our market. I hated our employees. I hated everything about this business. You know why? Because I wasn't a skater, I wasn't a surfer. But worse than that, I'm sitting there in the back trying to write code, trying to get my flow and get some code written to build this business. And right on the other side of the wall, I had these skate kids grinding their skateboards on every surface in the store. Because we built the store to be experiential. We wanted kids to skate everywhere. And so all day I'm trying to code and I'm hearing the bang of skateboards crashing into everything. And slowly but surely, I just hated everything about my day and about the customers. And once you find yourself in that place, I realized, holy crap, I made the same mistake again. I started a business because it sounded like a good business opportunity. But not only did I not have the passion for the product or the customer, I developed the exact opposite. So it's time for me to get out of there. At this point in my career, I'd done 3 startups in a row, and I wanted to see what it was like inside of a big company. Because I knew if I'm an entrepreneur and I want to be successful one day and build a big company, it would be useful to understand how big companies work. I knew that they had big buildings and people walked into them at 9 and walked out at 5, but I literally had no idea what happened during the day because all I knew was the startup world. And so I had a short list of companies that I thought would be interesting to work at, and I decided to go to Amazon. And I took a job as a product manager at Amazon Web Services. They wouldn't tell me what AWS was when I joined. They just said, it's cool. I decided to trust them. And lo and behold, they were right. And as a developer, I realized that the products they were building there were really interesting to me personally. And I learned a lot, and it was a great experience. But after a few years, it was time for me to go because I wanted to start my next thing again. So I left. I started looking around at a bunch of different ideas for what I wanted to do next. And I was mindful that I did not want to make the same mistake again. I wanted to have that conviction. I needed to have that conviction. Otherwise, you may as well just work at any old big company where you're guaranteed a paycheck. Conviction is what gets you through the hard nights, gets you through those long hours, gets you through the blood, sweat, and tears. And so I started thinking about problems that I had had, markets that I was passionate about, customers I was passionate about. And I realized that myself, as a developer through the years, had always needed communications as a core part of the products that we were building at all three of those companies. And all three of those times, we didn't have it. As a developer, I said, I'd love it if I could make this phone ring so I could call my customer and do something. And every time I said, but I have no friggin' idea how to make a phone ring. Like, that's magic. And so we started Twilio in 2008 to give developers the ability to build apps that communicate. And the thing about this product and this market that is driven by this fundamental need that I felt that I had, and that I felt the world needed, and that I felt developers, an audience with whom I could intimately identify, needed the product that we were building. And here's where the conviction came into play. We started the company in the very beginning of 2008. Built a prototype, had it up and running, had customers giving us really good feedback. In fact, the way we decided to actually pursue this idea, I had this method when I had ideas to go to customers and figure out if the idea was any good. And it went like this. I had some, crazy harebrained idea. I'd find friends of mine who were the likely customer audience for the thing we were building. Before we built anything, when it was just an idea, and I'd say, hey, I have an idea for a thing, and I'd explain it. What do you think about that? And a funny thing would often happen. They're your friends, they're trying to be polite. They'd say, that's interesting. How about them Yankees? And they'd find some way to change the topic, right? And you'd take a note in your head. You'd say, okay, well, I guess that wasn't interesting to them. And a funny thing happened with Twilio. I'd go to developer friends of mine, and I'd say, hey, we have this idea for an API you can call that allow you to call phones and text people and do all this neat stuff. And I'd explain it a little bit more, and I'd say, would you have use cases for it? And a funny thing happened. They would say, that's interesting. How about them Yankees? And initially I'd say, it must be a bad idea. But a funny thing happened. A minute, 2 minutes later, they'd say, hey, you know that phone thing you were talking about a minute ago? Could I use it to send a shipping confirmation to my customers after the package ships on my e-commerce site? And I'd say, yeah, absolutely, you can do that. And they'd say, oh, I get it. Cool, right? And I'd see the gears start to turn time and time and time again, and that gave us the conviction to go start this company and put all of our time into building this product. And this became very useful later because the summer of 2008, we had a product that was working, early customers who were giving us great feedback, building stuff, saying that it was really useful. So we went out to raise money in the summer of 2008. And I literally walked out of one of Silicon Valley's most prominent early stage investors, the full partner meeting, the thing where they're supposed to most of the time just say yes because they've already decided. I walked out of that meeting on the day Lehman Brothers collapsed. We spent the whole summer fundraising and we didn't have $1 to show for it. And we got feedback from investors that said, that developer thing is cute, but why don't you go build an app? Go build a PBX in the cloud. Go build a call center in the cloud. And if you're successful one day, you can add an API to it, right? That's what Facebook did. It seemed to work out for them. That's the role of APIs. But we had this conviction that developers needed this product. And so I remember the founders after that fateful Lehman Brothers influenced meeting, we looked at each other and we literally had zero, we didn't even have a bank account. We said, is this just a bad idea? All these investors told us that developers aren't an audience, you can't sell anything to them. The one investor that was interested bailed on us. Maybe this is a bad idea. Maybe we should all just go get jobs at Google and call it over. But I remember we said, no. The investors don't matter. Our customers are what matter, and the customers are telling us that we're on the right track. And our conviction is telling us, based on our own life experience, that we're on the right track. Investors don't matter. Customers matter. And so we went on. We raised like $20,000, $30,000 or some small amount from our parents just to have a bank account, I think. And we launched. We launched in November of 2008. And immediately, people started signing up. And immediately, they started paying us. I remember driving down the freeway the day we launched, the three founders. We were going to some event. We hadn't slept in like 2 days. And my co-founder was in the back seat, refreshing our intranet. And he said, holy crap, people are paying us. They trust us with their credit cards. And that's how we started. A month later, I got married. And I remember my wife and I, we returned all of our wedding gifts to add more runway to our personal finances. Pro tip, getting married and or a bar mitzvah, great way to extend your company's runway. And sure enough, after several months of traction, investors became interested. And we raised our first round of financing and started growing and building it all out from there. But the key thing I would say is there is no way that we would have been able to go through the hardship that we went through. We spent a year without a bank account, not taking salaries, having investor after investor tell us that this was a lousy idea. There's no way we would have been able to get through that if it wasn't for the conviction that we had that caused us to start this idea in the first place. And I don't believe there's any amount of A/B testing that will solve that problem for you. It's something that you have to feel in yourself. And I made that mistake twice in my career, starting something, 'cause I thought it'd be a good idea. We'll figure it out. If people don't buy football tickets, we'll A/B test our way until they do. That didn't cut it for me. And I think a lot of entrepreneurs, we do what we do not to make money. There are provably, measurably better ways in the world to make money than being an entrepreneur. We do what we do because we feel it fulfills something in us, and it's that conviction. And so I encourage everybody, pay attention to that conviction. Pay attention. Does the world need the thing you're building? Do you love the product? Do you love the customer? And do you love the market? And if those things are true, I believe you will love your life as an entrepreneur. And you will ultimately succeed because of that. So have conviction. Thank you, everybody.